Hi there. My name is Matthew Innes Thompson, and I'm a sessional lecturer working in the fall at the University of Toronto, Mississauga. And today I'm going to be giving a paper called An Immodest Proposal, a Soylent Green and the Fear of Being Consumed. Now, this is uh, an excerpt from a chapter of my dissertation, and chopping it down was quite difficult, so I'm just going to jump in so I don't go over time. In the cookbook aptly titled Unmentionable Cuisine, Calvin W. Schwab provides a recipe for a cat stew originating from Spain. The instructions are as follows. Quote, cut a dressed cat into serving-sized portions, salt them, and brown each well in olive oil. Add to the pan some white wine, bay leaves, and thyme. Cover and simmer for about 30 minutes. Add shelled peas, shelled fava beans, sliced carrots, sliced turnips, diced potatoes, and chopped onions. Add water barely to cover and simmer until the vegetables are done. End quote. Alongside the cat stew, Schwab includes recipes for broiled beetle grubs, grilled rat Bordeaux style, and fermented mare's milk. Schwab, a veterinary epidemiologist with a specialization in parasites, obviously did not suffer from squeamishness. But what compelled this veterinarian to collect culinary esoterica from around the world? Schwab, who worked on the book during the 1970s amid runaway population growth, wanted to facilitate the expanded palates that would become necessary with the impending food shortage. In the introduction, Schwab states that the book, quote, is meant to be a practical guide to help us and our children prepare for the not too distant day when the world's growing food population problem presses closer upon us and our overly restrictive eating habits become less tolerable, end quote. Amongst Schwab's culinary collection of taboo cuisine, one source of protein remains conspicuously unmentioned, however. I half expected to find, tucked into the section Rodent and Other Mammalian Meat, a recipe or two inspired by Swift's assertion that, quote, a young healthy child, well nursed, is, at a year old, a most delicious, nourishing, and wholesome food, whether stewed, roasted, baked, or boiled, end quote. That a stewed yearling Homo sapiens is not included in unmentionable cuisine makes sense, on the one hand, as Schwab was trying to disabuse readers of their food prejudices, not horrify them. On the other hand, that Schwab omits a recipe involving the unspeakable act of anthropophagy demonstrates, by its absence, the tacit link between overpopulation and cannibalism. While there isn't a cannibalistic recipe in Schwab's gastronomy, the taboo subject is mentioned once. In the introduction, Schwab quotes the agronomist René Dumont, who said, quote, by consuming meat which wastes the grain that could have saved them, last year we ate the children of the Sahel, Ethiopia, and Bangladesh, end quote. Schwab goes on to dismiss this claim as sweepingly simplistic, but its inclusion in the book is important nevertheless. The fear that as our population grows and we run out of food, we will begin to eat each other is not dwelt on at length or even explicitly stated in the writings of most demographers. And yet the idea of cannibalism crops up surprisingly often in the writing inspired by overpopulation crises. These mentions of the unmentionable, though they may seem inconsequential at first, demonstrate an anxiety that links overpopulation and cannibalism. This anxiety stems from a fear of being consumed by the other. The fear that links overpopulation and cannibalism, and the racism which fuels it, is expressed most clearly in the 1973 film Soylent Green. In what follows, I will read Soylent Green as a condensation and clarification of the otherwise murky relationship between demography and anthropophagy. In order to situate Soylent Green within the problematic demographic rhetoric of the 1960s and 70s, I read it alongside Paul Ehrlich's influential 1968 book, The Population Bomb. Soylent Green begins with an opening montage that compresses more than 100 years of American history into a frenetic sequence. One early image shows a horse-drawn trolley ridden by well-dressed white passengers and driven by a solitary black man. As the montage progresses, crowds of people, polluting industry, mass consumption, and traffic indicate that as the century wears on, things are only getting worse. While the montage effectively conveys the damages that capitalism has wrought on the environment, it also yearns for a time in American history defined by endemic racism. As Michelle Yates observes, the film's environmental nostalgia asks audiences to reinvest in hegemonic white masculinity, a system of power and oppression intimately linked to capitalism. Soylent Green follows Detective Thorne, played by Charlton Heston, as he tries to solve the murder of William Simonson in a very crowded New York City. Simonson was a board member of the corporation Soylent, which feeds half the world with its freeze-dried crackers. Thorne spends the rest of the film searching for a motive, which hinges on a mysterious ingredient in the company's most popular wafer, Soylent Green. We are introduced to Thorne in the apartment he shares with Saul Roth, played by Edward G. Robinson, who works as Thorne's book or researcher. Saul is old enough that he remembers a time when there were less people, a natural environment, and real food. Now the staircases of every building are clogged with homeless people. The city is suffused in a green haze, and everyone survives on a ration of colored Soylent wafers. As Saul clambers onto a stationary bike that powers their apartment, he laments the state of the planet. Quote, "When I was a kid, food was food, before our scientific magician poisoned the water, polluted the soil, decimated plant and animal life. Why, in my day, you could buy meat anywhere. Eggs they had, real butter, fresh lettuce in the stores. How can anything survive in a climate like this? A heat wave all year long, a greenhouse effect." End quote. In the world of the film, all of the injustices and injuries enumerated by Saul have been caused by one thing: overpopulation. Saul's concern about too many people is echoed in Paul Ehrlich's influential book, The Population Bomb. The book propelled the issue of overpopulation to the forefront environmental discourse. Ehrlich mobilized dialed prognostications and forceful rhetoric in his bid to convince the American public that overpopulation was the most significant threat to human life on the planet. In his desperate plea for action, Ehrlich unconsciously drew on his fear that the rapidly growing populations of the developing world would overwhelm North America, consuming their resources and demanding their way of life. That science fiction and environmentalism go hand in hand makes sense, as both are concerned with evoking the future in order to comment on the present. The Population Bomb, like Soylent Green, predicts that in the near future, the crisis of overpopulation will reach apocalyptic proportions. Both texts were produced during a unique moment in human history. It had taken until around 1800 for humanity to reach the 1 billion population mark. The second billion was added in another 125 years, and the third billion arrived in 1960, just 35 years later. From the perspective of the late 1960s, it looked as though the world population would continue to double at this alarming rate until some global calamity. Throughout the Population Bomb, Ehrlich refers to overpopulation as a disease and the planet as a patient. For example, Ehrlich says, quote, "A cancer is an uncontrolled multiplication of cells. The population explosion is an uncontrolled multiplication of people. We must shift our efforts from the treatment of the symptoms to the cutting out of the cancer. The operation will demand many apparently brutal and heartless decisions. The pain may be intense, but the disease is so far advanced that only with radical surgery does the patient have a chance of survival." End quote. While Ehrlich would not characterize it this way, it is easy to read the cancer that he says must be cut out as a metaphor for India. India figures prominently in the book as the prime example of a country with runaway population growth and inadequate food supply. At the beginning of the book, Ehrlich describes a trip to Delhi, which at that moment was no more densely populated than New York City. Riding in a taxi to his hotel, Ehrlich recounts the fear he felt as he witnessed, quote, "people thrusting their hands through the taxi window, begging, people defecating and urinating, people clinging to buses, people herding animals, people, end quote. What this passage reveals is that Ehrlich was not so much afraid of too many people as he was of too many Indians. India, as Ehrlich's worst-case example of unchecked population growth, function in the book as the planet's cancerous tumor, the site of, quote, "an uncontrolled multiplication of cells that must be dealt with by radical surgery," end quote. Ehrlich's feelings about India are indicative of the patronizing, racist, and protectionist arguments that are prevalent in neo-Malthusian and environmental discourse of the 1970s. Underlying Ehrlich's examination of the Indian problem is the assumption that if the standard of living enjoyed in the West is to be maintained, the growth in power and population in the formerly colonized nations is not to be tolerated. Having established the prominent and problematic fears of overpopulation in 1970s environmentalism and science fiction, it is now possible to return to cannibalism.
Overpopulation and cannibalism are linked by their shared concern over the availability of food and their tendency to dehumanize. In The Population Bomb, Ehrlich mentions cannibalism only once, but his invocation of the practice is tellingly situated within a metaphorical comparison of overcrowded humans to animals. He says, quote, "We know all too well that when rats or other animals are overcrowded, the results are pronounced and usually unpleasant. Social systems may break down, cannibalism may occur, breeding may cease altogether," end quote. And now I just want to say, if you haven't seen Soylent Green, this is a spoiler alert. Quote, "The ocean is dying, the plankton are dying, it's people. Soylent Green is made out of people." Quote, end quote. Waiting until the final minutes of the film to reveal what has been heavily suggested all along, Detective Thorne utters these lines while bleeding out in a church. The film ends as Thorne is carried away on a stretcher, exclaiming more confidently now, "Soylent Green is people." These seemingly anomalous instances of anthropophagy in Soylent Green and the population bomb are in fact deeply entwined with concerns about overpopulation. Ehrlich, alongside Soylent Green, is deeply worried about non-white populations overwhelming the planet and demanding the resources enjoyed by those living in the West. Neo-Malthusianism can, like cannibalism, be characterized as a fear of being consumed by the other. This fear, alongside the term cannibalism, can be traced back to the early days of colonialism. The term cannibal originated on Columbus's first voyage when he encountered the Arawak people who lived on what is now called Cuba. The Arawak spoke of a people who inhabited the islands to the east as the Caniba, which seems to have been a mispronunciation of what the Cariba called themselves. Columbus was led to believe, through an interpreter, that the Cariba were cynocephaly, or dog-headed people who ate men. That the cynocephaly came with Columbus from the Old World in the form of a myth traceable back through antiquity to ancient Egypt lends credence to the argument that cannibalism was actually quite uncommon among indigenous people. In other words, Columbus discovered what he set out to find. In the process, through the etymological slippage between the Latin for dog, canis, the Arawak, caniba, and the actual cariba, the word cannibal was coined, with all of its attendant colonial baggage. In Cannibalism in the Colonial World, Peter Hume argues that while there may have been instances of cannibalism among non-European peoples, the evidence of anthropophagy has the evidence that anthropology has used to prove the practice of ritual cannibalism throughout the colonized world is shaky at best. What is more interesting for Hume is the consistent desire on the part of European colonizers to discover and label cannibals. This labeling allowed colonizers to dehumanize indigenous peoples, patting themselves on the back when they, quote, eradicate cannibalism by introducing Christianity, itself steeped in figural cannibalism. The European projections of cannibalism onto whichever indigenous group they happen to be colonizing is less indicative of rampant anthropophagy and more testimony for, quote, the European dread of being eaten by savages, end quote. Thus, the demographic dystopians share with their colonial and anthropological counterparts a fear of being consumed by the other. This fear of being consumed, and the racism of which it is a part, joins the seemingly disparate concerns of overpopulation and cannibalism. Before the film Soylent Green demonstrated this shared anxiety, Thomas Malthus, the original doomsday demographer, drew a causal link between the overpopulation and cannibalism. Malthus's An Essay on the Principle of Population, first published in 1798, is best known for its claim that populations increase by doubling, while food production grows in much slower increments. Malthus suggests, like Ehrlich and Soylent Green, that when populations exceed the carrying capacity of their environment, they may turn their appetites towards themselves. He states, quote, "Cannibalism undoubtedly prevailed in many parts of the New World, and I cannot think that it must have had its origin in extreme want, though the custom might afterwards be continued from other motives. It seems to be a worse compliment to human nature and to the savage state to attribute this horrid repast to malignant passions without the goad of necessity. When once it had prevailed, though only occasionally from this cause, the fear that a savage might feel of becoming a repast to his enemies might easily raise the passion of rancor and revenge to so high a pitch as to urge him to treat his prisoners in this way." End quote. Malthus imagines being so afraid of being eaten that one is compelled to cannibalize one's own enemies. He transfers his own fear of being consumed onto the quote unquote savage, demonstrating the enduring link between fears of overpopulation and the horrid repast. This link, which emerges in only a few pages here and there in Malthus and his followers, is brought into focus by the film Soylent Green. Soylent Green expresses this underlying connection, demonstrating its basis in colonial anxiety, but it also provides the means to move beyond it. For cannibalism is more than a racist label affixed to indigenous peoples. It is, according to whom, a trope of exceptional power. Having established the racist fears that join the discourses of cannibalism and overpopulation, I would now like to shift gears in order to investigate through Soylent Green the potential ecological benefits of cannibalism. While on the surface the film presents cannibalism as deeply horrifying, I want to explore an alternate reading. Thorne may condemn the freeze-dried anthropophagy, but most other characters in the know remain mute about it, or even embrace it. The acknowledgement of cannibalism as necessary or even beneficial in the age of overpopulation by Soylent Green creates the opportunity to reevaluate the practice. Though Thorne is the first to reveal to the audience the secret ingredient of Soylent Green, he is by no means the first to know. As Saul does more research on the Simonson killing, he pieces together the evidence that Soylent Green is made from human flesh. Saul goes to the Exchange in search of more information about Simonson to aid Thorne's investigation. The Exchange is a sort of library, accessible only to books, like Saul. Saul speaks about the Simonson case with a number of older books. While holding a sheet of paper containing the revelation about Soylent, Saul says, quote, "I see the words, but I can't believe them," end quote. The head book responds, quote, "Believe, the evidence is overwhelming," end quote. While Saul and the other books are visibly shaken about the truth, what Saul does next defies easy explanation. Saul leaves the Exchange, returns to the apartment to write Thorne a note, and then goes to one of the city's voluntary euthanasia centers. It seems strange that, upon discovering that the dead are transformed into food, Saul heads straight to the place where his life will be taken and his body transformed. Presumably as an enticement for the older population to give up their lives, donating not only their space, but also their nourishment, the center is equipped with screening rooms where the condemned can watch a final film. Saul, full of the horror attending the knowledge that one is surrounded by cannibals, speaks with the handlers at the center, specifying his favorite color, orange, and his musical preference, like classical. He's led to a theater where two attendants in white robes hand Saul a cup of dark liquid. It looks like a futuristic rendering of Socrates' last moments. Beethoven's Pastoral Symphony plays as images of a natural landscape are projected on a wraparound screen. Saul, Simonson, a priest, and the other books at the Exchange all learn of the mass cannibalism occurring before Thorne does, and yet none of them can bring themselves to utter the truth aloud. The horrid repast is communicated as a hushed confession or an exchanged note. This trend continues as Saul nears the final moments of his film. Thorne, finding Saul's note, dashes to the euthanasia center to catch him before he passes. Thorne is shown to an observation window where he takes in the images of an unpolluted environment that are being shown to Saul. We see, but do not hear, Saul's own hushed confession of the truth to Thorne. Up to the end of the film, none of the characters who learn of the secret of Soylent Green can bring themselves to express it above the level of a whisper. The film's refusal to speak about eating people can be explained easily enough as narratively expedient. By obscuring the anthropophagy until the final moments, the film preserves its surprise ending. The audience, like Thorne, realizes only too late that everyone is involved in cannibalism, simultaneously eater and soon to be eaten. While it is tempting to attribute the unspoken secret to the structure of the plot twist, the film encourages, without authorizing, an alternate reading. This alternate reading hinges on Saul's decision to sacrifice himself immediately after gaining knowledge of what that entails. I read this not as an act of resignation, but of affirmation. Saul, realizing the scale of the population crisis, accepts the need for intelligent solutions. How else to solve the twin concerns of the Malthusians? Cannibalism both reduces the population and increases the food supply. It is the perfect fix for what Schwab in Unmentionable Cuisine calls, quote, the food population problem. Saul and the others who remain mute do so despite their horror because they realize the necessity of such a repast. They struggle. The pain is clear on all their faces with the burden of this information, but they ultimately agree with the words that end Schwab's cookbook. Quote, all the world's people must begin to overcome in themselves, and even more so in their children, senseless taboos about what is edible and what is not. How ironic it would be in this scientific age for mankind to starve largely because of a bunch of old wives' tales, irrational beliefs, silly associations, and the lack of a sufficient spirit of culinary and gustatory adventure. While Malthus, Ehrlich, and Thorne all see cannibalism as a barbaric effect of overpopulation, the other characters in Soylent Green act as though anthropophagy is a horrible but necessary solution. They weigh the violation of an enduring taboo against the prospect of mass starvation. Saul, presented visually as a Socrates figure, goes the farthest in accepting the law of the state in the interest of the community by drinking the hemlock, so to speak. Soylent Green clarifies many of the strange intellectual genealogies that led to the overpopulation panic of the 1970s. Its overt connection of overpopulation to cannibalism demonstrates that these are not incidental issues, but deeply entangled anxieties. Soylent Green, drawing of the rhetoric of the neo-Malthusians, expresses the unspoken fear that connects colonial perspectives on overpopulation and anthropophagy. This fear revolves around a racially, economically, and geographically marginalized other who, from the time of Columbus to the present, has threatened to consume colonizers, anthropologists, and demographic dystopians. And yet, Soylent Green also presents the figure of Saul, who, rather than recoil in fear, walks bravely into the maw of the cannibal masses. Thank you very much for listening.